Based on true events, a boy receives a scholarship to attend school in a secluded and mysterious colony, only to uncover the dark horrors lurking within. In 1989, Chile, during the final months of the dictatorship, Pablo recovers from head injuries at a hospital within Colonia Dignidad. Founded in the early 1960s by a former German medic and other German settlers who fled their homeland after World War II, Colonia Dignidad is a secluded and tightly controlled settlement in southern Chile. Renowned for its strict religious principles and adherence to Germanic traditions, the colony also operates a hospital and provides charitable aid to local communities, fostering a reputation as a benevolent organization. Now opening a school for Chilean children, the colony has chosen Pablo to be their first recipient of a scholarship, impressed by his exceptional singing talent. To Pablo's delight, his local pastor arrives to check on him. After praising his bravery during his treatment, the pastor shifts focus to the scholarship opportunity at the colony. Just then, they overhear a group of boys rehearsing for their choir. Pablo remarks how weird they sing, but the pastor dismisses his comment, redirecting attention to the benefits of the scholarship. Throughout the settlement, a speaker repeatedly blares, "To work is to serve God." Later, the pastor introduces Pablo to Paul Schaefer, the colony's founder and leader, known affectionately by members as Uncle Paul. Paul warmly greets Pablo and congratulates him for the successful treatment. He then invites him and the pastor to observe the choir's practice. On the drive home, the pastor promises to return with Pablo and his mother the next morning. When Paul asks about the boy's love for singing, the pastor gets excited as he shares how the church fills up whenever he performs. That night, a colony worker, Giselle, reverently reports her day's labor to Paul. She later shares a vivid dream of an empty crib, which the community leader interprets as a sign she's not ready for motherhood. He then urges her to keep working hard, reminding her it's all in service to God. The next day, Pablo's mother, Cecilia, a temporary worker, labors alongside others in the colony's mountainous region. A loudspeaker echoes the community's motto repeatedly, serving as a constant reminder and source of motivation. At the colony leader's home, Pablo excitedly shows his mother the imported clothes Paul gave him and shares his enthusiasm about joining the choir. Cecilia hesitates, however, citing his recent misbehavior that caused the head injury. Offended, Pablo blames her for the way he turned out after she kicked out his father. He also insists he'd rather listen to the pastor, who has been caring for him. When Paul and the pastor arrive, Paul lists the benefits Pablo would receive in the colony, including education, music training, and spiritual guidance. While grateful, Cecilia notes that the pastor is already looking after Pablo. In response, the leader emphasizes that what he's offering is entirely free, with the pastor encouraging Cecilia to take it. Paul and the pastor then leave to give Cecilia time to think. After some thought, she asks Pablo if he truly wants the scholarship. When he confirms, she makes him promise to behave, and he agrees. Teasing him, she points to the TV, noting he'll finally get to watch one, while Pablo excitedly points to the piano, saying he'll also learn to play it. Now left alone in Paul's home, Pablo relaxes in front of the TV for a moment, before eagerly settling onto the piano seat. Moments later, the colony leader enters with a glass of warm milk and pulls up a chair. He asks about Pablo's experience singing at church, to which the boy admits he finds church music dull. Encouraging him, Paul invites Pablo to sing any song he likes. Pablo obliges enthusiastically, leaving the community leader visibly impressed. Later, Giselle escorts Pablo to the sleeping quarters. As he unpacks and takes in his new surroundings, a choir member named Rudolph quietly slips into the room. Eager to make friends, Pablo introduces himself and asks Rudolph's name. Glancing cautiously out the window and then crouching to ensure he's not seen, Rudolph whispers a warning. They're not allowed to talk inside. He explains that both God and Uncle Paul forbid secret conversations. A confused Pablo then points out that the community leader isn't even there, so he wouldn't have known anyway. That night, barking dogs wake Pablo. Curious, he steps outside and meets Ingrid, who admits she let the dogs out because she enjoys watching them run. Recognizing him as the new choir member, she introduces herself as the pianist. When Pablo asks about Rudolph's absence from the sleeping quarters, Ingrid explains he's a sprinter, someone who's tasked with running errands for Uncle Paul. She adds that sprinters have privileges, like watching TV, and points to Rudolph doing so in Paul's house to prove her point. Before parting, Ingrid warns Pablo not to tell anyone about the dogs. In a secluded wood shop, Giselle secretly meets with Johannes, a fellow colony member, with their forbidden relationship weighing heavily on them. After giving him food, Giselle shares Paul's interpretation of her dream. Overcome with guilt, Johannes grows anxious, fearing that God and Uncle Paul are aware of their secret meetings. Blaming himself, he becomes convinced he is possessed by the devil. After Giselle departs, Johannes desperately attempts to exorcise the evil spirit he believes has taken hold of him. Later, Paul convenes a community meeting after a worker reported seeing Johannes and Giselle together. Standing awkwardly on stage before the silent crowd, the two endure Paul's scathing reprimand for their actions. As punishment, Paul orders a tearful Giselle to slap Johannes. He then commands several men to forcefully put a white sweater on Johannes and take him away. One sunny morning, Pablo and others are sent to the cornfields to pick corn. To lighten the dull task, Pablo strikes up a conversation with Rudolph, teasing him about how lucky he is to watch TV. Rudolph curtly responds that he doesn't even care for TV. Seizing the moment, he asks Pablo about life beyond the gated community, admitting he's never been to town. Pablo then describes the hustle and bustle outside: streets, shops, cars, and traffic lights. When Rudolph confesses he doesn't know what a traffic light is, Pablo enthusiastically explains it to him. He later casually invites Rudolph to join him in seeing the band Los Prisioneros, only to realize he has no idea who they are. As Pablo begins relieving himself, Rudolph warns that God would be angry. Unbothered, the Chilean brushes it off, emboldening his new friend to do the same. In Paul's home, he, Ingrid, Giselle, and two workers convene as the latter accuse Ingrid of releasing the dogs. Ingrid denies it, recounting her day to defend herself. Paul then begins sniffing Ingrid. He claims he smells the devil on her and signals the others to act. Following his cue, they grab a white sweater and forcefully put it on her. Menacingly, the leader then demands she play the piano. As she does so while crying, Paul signals for further punishment. Hesitant but obedient, Giselle grabs Ingrid's hair and repeatedly yanks it back while she continues to play. The next morning, Pablo sneaks into Paul's home to try playing the piano, but is startled by a woman's distant screams. That night, he hears similar cries, and, through the window, sees three men dragging and slapping Ingrid. Alarmed, he asks Rudolph, who hushes him, and explains that the white sweater signifies the wearer is spiritually sick and in need of healing. Suddenly, Paul enters their room to ensure the boys are all asleep. While practicing shooting in the woods, Pablo suddenly asks Paul about the word sprinter, mentioning he heard it from someone. Unwilling to reveal its true meaning, the leader gives the standard English definition and redirects the boys' focus to a picture of a deer. Paul proceeds to demonstrate his skills by repeatedly shooting the deer's head. As Pablo practices with the choir, his talent quickly makes him the leader's favorite. While cleaning Paul's home, Giselle secretly takes a science book, hoping it would help with her desire to have a baby. At the woodshop, she and Johannes read about animal reproduction, a topic unfamiliar to them due to their sheltered upbringing. Peeling back a page, they find a painting of animals in an intimate pose. Believing that is how it's done, they awkwardly attempt to mimic it, but fail. One day, Paul gathers the boys for a race, explaining he needs a sprinter for a special event with guests tomorrow. He announces that the winner will be chosen for the task. When Pablo wins, another boy immediately protests, claiming a Chilean can't be a sprinter. Offended, Pablo shoves him, but Paul intervenes before it escalates and sends the boys away. He then gives Pablo a pep talk about his role for the next day. Later, Paul and an aide review and compile tape recordings of the community members, ensuring clips of Pablo are included. They then prepare copies to give to the Chilean authorities and the German embassy. At the clinic, Giselle carefully removes Pablo's stitches now that his head wound has fully healed. She then steps out briefly to get the visitors' names in the waiting area. One of them, Marta, suddenly asks if she knows her sister, Gloria Silva. When Giselle doesn't, Marta begins addressing everyone in the room with an impassioned speech. She exposes Colonia Dignidad's dark reality, revealing that while locals praise the Germans for their medical aid, the colony is far more sinister. Marta claims her sister was a union leader who was detained there in March 1974. She adds that Gloria suffered much before disappearing. As the workers drag Marta away, she desperately pleads for help finding her sister, while a confused Pablo looks on. At a special event at Colonia Dignidad, High-ranking Chilean officials and German embassy representatives gather. In his speech, Paul expresses gratitude for their unwavering support, despite efforts by many to tarnish the colony's reputation. As a gesture of thanks, he has Pablo personally distribute the prepared tapes to the guests. The First Lady of Chile then takes the stage, praising the colony for its support of local residents. She gives special recognition to Pablo, believing he exemplifies the colony's positive impact and expressing hope that many more Chileans will benefit similarly in the future. After the event, Paul speaks with a Chilean general, who commends him for his efforts in running the colony. Paul then hands him a flyer featuring Gloria Silva. After a brief glance, the general reassures him there's nothing to worry about. In reality, the colony has been in collusion with the Chilean dictatorship since the 1970s. In exchange for allowing Paul and the German settlers to stay in the country, the colony's remote location has become the cover for the government's clandestine activities, including suppressing dissenters like Gloria Silva. This alliance has also enabled Paul to escape deportation to Germany, where he's accused of despicable crimes. Moreover, the partnership allows him to maintain unchecked authority over the colony. While Rudolph watches TV, Pablo secretly observes from outside. When Rudolph suddenly turns it off and heads to another room, Pablo follows. To his shock, he sees his friend in Paul's bedroom, sitting nearby with a terrified expression as the colony leader lies in bed. Unbeknownst to Pablo, someone is secretly recording his every move. The next morning, Paul invites him into his house. After praising Pablo's performance at the event, he gently reveals that he knows about his nighttime escapades. The leader probes if he envies Rudolph for watching TV or being more loved by him, but the nervous boy silently shakes his head. Paul then threatens to report him to the pastor and kick him out of the colony. When Pablo denies doing anything wrong, the leader warns him about envy and keeping secrets, adding that disobedience will lead him down the same path as his delinquent father. Ultimately, however, the colony leader allows the boy to stay. One night, driven by desperation for a child, Giselle and Johannes sneak a baby out of the colony's hospital. The next morning, Giselle, with Pablo by her side, rushes to a nearby river where several men have found Ingrid unconscious. She had apparently attempted to escape the colony by crossing the river, but crashed into the rocks. After loading Ingrid into the ambulance, Giselle solemnly tells Pablo that disobedience is a grave illness with devastating consequences. That night, Pablo sneaks out of his room after spotting Giselle. Curious about where she's going, he decides to follow her. To his bewilderment, he later finds Giselle and Johannes on stage under dimmed lights. There's a TV in front of them, playing a recording of their intimate act at the woodshop. After the clip ends, Paul harshly reprimands them, not only for their actions but also for stealing a baby. He then orders them to strip. Through tears, the pair reluctantly obeys. Shining a flashlight on their exposed forms, Paul berates them, declaring that sinners like them will never be deserving of a child. Overcome with emotion, Giselle begins screaming at Johannes. The leader then calmly switches on the lights, revealing that the other workers had been silently watching from the back all along. Horrified, Pablo turns and bolts out of the area. On Christmas Day, all the children are summoned to the main hall. After a round of singing, Paul introduces a man dressed as Santa Claus, who appears briefly before being replaced by someone in a Krampus costume. The sight of the Christmas demon terrifies the children, as Krampus snarls and prowls menacingly. Suddenly, Krampus seizes a boy, dragging him to the front, sniffing him for evil spirits in Paul's usual manner. The boy is so frightened that he soils himself. Krampus then turns to Pablo. Though he tries to appear brave, a flicker of fear crosses his face as he winces under the demon's gaze. As the children cry in fear, Paul dismisses the man in the Krampus costume. He then reassures the children, telling them that as long as they are obedient and have a clear conscience, they have nothing to fear. Meanwhile, the man wearing the Krampus costume removes the mask. It's Johannes, his face heavy with guilt as he quietly stares at the mask. While doing some physical activity, Pablo gets into a fight with another boy. When Paul reminds him that sprinters shouldn't behave that way, the Chilean boy retorts that he no longer wants to be one. Noticing Pablo's bad mood, the leader orders the other boys to tickle him as some sort of punishment. Afterward, he warns Pablo to reconsider his actions, adding that this is his last chance or he'll inform his mother. That night, Paul brings Pablo into his bedroom and presents him with a gift, promising he can now watch TV there anytime. However, when Pablo seems uneasy, Paul abruptly snaps at him. Pablo then finds out what the true role of a sprinter is. The next morning, Giselle, her face etched with concern, quietly escorts Pablo back to the sleeping quarters. A lifetime of working under the colony leader has left her all too aware of what Pablo endured the night before. When Rudolph asks Pablo about his experience, the still traumatized boy can barely respond. Rudolph admits he didn't like his own experience either, but says he believes the leader's claim that it will secure their place in heaven. After a moment of silence, Pablo firmly declares his intent to leave the colony. When Rudolph warns that he'll get caught, Pablo confidently says he can cross the river and urges Rudolph to join him. Concerned, Rudolph insists that God will inform Paul of their plan. However, the defiant Chilean retorts that he no longer believes in God, having seen through Paul's true nature. Conflicted, Rudolph begins singing a church hymn as he grapples with Pablo's plan. That night, Paul enters the sleeping quarters and sits beside Pablo. He quietly acknowledges that he knows the boy is awake and admits he can't sleep either. Understanding Paul's implication, Pablo firmly declares that he no longer wants to be a sprinter and is leaving. Though taken aback, Paul chooses to let him be for now. Before sunrise, Pablo sets out for the river, determined to leave. However, a car suddenly pulls up beside him. Realizing they won't let him escape, he takes off running, but is soon captured by Paul's men. Later that day, as Pablo lies unconscious in bed, Giselle reluctantly injects him with a substance to temporarily paralyze his body. Sometime later, Giselle meets with Pablo's mother, Cecilia, and his local pastor. Observing the meeting is one of Paul's men to ensure the worker follows their script. Giselle claims that Pablo fell gravely ill and that no treatment could save him. Alarmed, Cecilia demands to see her son. The worker then further explains that the boy's illness caused hallucinations, leading to a fatal accident at the river. Unconvinced, Cecilia rises and insists on seeing him. Having already anticipated this reaction, Giselle and the man readily lead her to an adjoining room, where Pablo's body lies in an open casket. As Cecilia approaches her son's body, her grief is mixed with anger, and she glares at the pastor who persuaded her to send Pablo to the colony. Breaking down, she clutches Pablo's body in despair, unaware that he is, in fact, conscious. Paralyzed by the substance Giselle administered, Pablo tries to communicate, but remains unable to move. Overcome with devastation, Cecilia tries to pick up her son and take him away, but she's quickly restrained. That evening, Pablo finally awakens, his body aching from hours of immobility. After stretching, he notices Rudolph's bed is empty. Suspecting his friend is once again enduring Paul's cruelty, Pablo sneaks into the leader's house. There, he retrieves a weapon Paul once trained him to use and heads to the bedroom with quiet determination.